Picture a Norwegian farmer in 1903 digging into a strange mound on his land and discovering the carved prow of a Viking longship, buried with all its treasures 1,000 years ago, ready to carry its passengers to the afterlife. So sit back, grab a cup of tea, and get ready to explore the remarkable Viking tradition of burying their elite dead in actual ships on dry land. Discover how these vessel graves served as transportation to the afterlife. Understand why archaeologists found long ships filled with treasures buried in Norwegian hills, and learn what these discoveries reveal about Norse beliefs, social hierarchies, burial rituals, and the profound meaning of sending the dead to sea without water. Imagine standing on a hillside in medieval Norway, watching hundreds of people drag a fully equipped longship up from the fjord. This isn't preparation for a raid or trading voyage. The ship will never touch water again. Instead, it's about to become the most elaborate grave imaginable, a vessel to carry the dead not across earthly seas, but through the mysterious waters separating this world from the next. For the Vikings, death was a journey, and the elite required transportation befitting their status. What better vessel for that final voyage than the ships that had defined their lives? The tradition of ship burial represents one of archaeology's most spectacular gifts. When farmers and construction workers accidentally uncovered these buried vessels, they revealed time capsules of Viking life. Ships packed with weapons, jewelry, household goods, sacrificed animals, and sometimes sacrificed humans. Ships burned on beaches in elaborate cremation ceremonies. Ships outlined in stone when a real vessel couldn't be afforded. Each burial tells a story not just about death, but about how Vikings understood life, power, and the cosmos itself. Ship burials weren't unique to Vikings. Other seafaring cultures developed similar practices, but the Norse took the concept to extraordinary heights, quite literally. The Oseberg ship, discovered in 1903, was buried under a mound 40 meters in diameter and originally 6 meters high. The resources required, the labor to drag a 21-meter ship inland, dig an enormous pit, construct a burial chamber and build the mound, represented months of community effort. This wasn't simple disposal of the dead. It was a statement visible for miles, proclaiming the power of the deceased and their family for generations. To understand Viking ship burials, we must first grasp what ships meant to Norse society. These weren't merely transportation, they were the technology that made the Viking Age possible. Ships enabled raids, trade, exploration, and settlement. They were expressions of technological mastery, artistic achievement, and social organization. A leader who commanded a longship commanded respect. The ship itself embodied qualities Vikings admired: strength, flexibility, the ability to navigate dangerous waters. What more appropriate vehicle for navigating the dangers of death? The archaeological evidence reveals two main types of ship burial: cremation and inhumation, burial of the intact body. Cremation ship burials involved burning the vessel with the deceased and their goods, usually on a beach or specially prepared site. The spectacular flames sent smoke to the sky, perhaps carrying the spirit upward. Afterward, the ashes and remaining metal objects might be gathered and buried under a mound. Ibn Fadlan, an Arab diplomat who witnessed a Rus, Swedish Viking ship cremation in 922 CE, described an elaborate ceremony culminating in the burning of a chief with his ship, goods, and a sacrifice slave girl. Inhumation ship burials preserved the vessel and its contents, creating the archaeological treasures we know today. The ship would be dragged to a prepared location, often a prominent ridge or hillside. A pit was dug to accommodate the vessel, sometimes with a wooden burial chamber constructed amidships. The deceased was placed in the ship with their grave goods arranged around them. Animals, horses, dogs, sometimes cattle, were sacrificed and placed aboard. Then the entire assemblage was covered with earth and turf, creating the distinctive burial mounds that dot the Scandinavian landscape. The choice between cremation and inhumation varied by region, time period, and possibly personal preference. Norway favoured inhumation, preserving the spectacular ships we know today. Sweden and Denmark showed more variation, with cremation more common in some periods. Iceland, settled by Norwegians, continued the inhumation tradition but adapted it to local conditions. Ships were rare and valuable in Iceland, so symbolic boat graves using stones became common. The variation suggests this wasn't rigid dogma but a flexible tradition adapted to local circumstances. Dating ship burials reveals their chronological span. The practice began in the Vendel period, 550 to 750 CE, before the Viking Age proper. Some of Sweden's most spectacular ship burials at Vendel and Volsgard predate the Viking expansion. The tradition peaked during the 9th and 10th centuries, the height of Viking power and prosperity. By the 11th century, as Christianity spread through Scandinavia, ship burials became rare, replaced by Christian burial in consecrated ground. The last ship burials represent a fascinating transition, sometimes combining pagan and Christian elements. The most famous ship burials have become icons of the Viking Age. The Oseberg ship, buried around 834 CE, contained 2 women of extraordinary status. The elder, aged 70 to 80, may have been Queen Osa, grandmother of Harald Fairhair, who united Norway. The younger woman, aged 50 to 55, might have been a priestess or the queen's attendant. Their burial included stunning carved wooden artifacts, tapestries, sleds, a wagon, kitchen equipment, looms and personal items, an entire mobile household for the afterlife. The Gokstad ship, buried around 900 CE, contained a male warrior in his 40s, possibly King Olaf Geirstad Alf. Built for war and speed, the ship was accompanied by weapons, shields, horses, dogs and even peacocks, exotic birds that demonstrated far-reaching connections. The burial's martial character contrasts with Oseberg's domestic richness, showing how ship burials reflected the deceased's life role. Where Oseberg emphasized textile production and household management, Gokstad stressed warfare and adventure. The Tune ship, though less well preserved, adds another dimension. Buried around 900 CE, it contained a man with weapons and riding equipment. The ship itself was older, perhaps 50 to 70 years when buried, suggesting vessels accumulated biography before their final use. Using an old, possibly famous ship for burial might have added meaning, the deceased joining not just any vessel but one with its own history of voyages and victories. Beyond Norway, ship burials spread wherever Vikings settled. The Ladby ship in Denmark, the only ship burial preserved in situ, shows Danish practices. Buried around 925 CE, it contained a chieftain with weapons, horses and dogs. The ship was oriented north-south, unlike the east-west orientation common in Norway, suggesting regional variations in cosmological beliefs. 11 horses were arranged at the stern, an extraordinary sacrifice of valuable animals. England's Sutton Hoo ship burial, though technically Anglo-Saxon rather than Viking, shows related traditions. Dating to the early 7th century, it predates Viking raids, but reflects shared Germanic heritage. The spectacular grave goods, gold and garnet jewellery, silver bowls, weapons and the famous helmet, equal anything from Scandinavia. The connection reminds us that ship burial was part of broader Northern European traditions the Vikings inherited and developed. The rituals surrounding ship burial extended far beyond simply placing a body in a boat. Saga evidence and archaeological findings suggest elaborate ceremonies lasting days or weeks. The deceased might lie in state while preparations were made. The ship had to be selected or prepared. Was it the deceased's own vessel, or one specially built? Grave goods were assembled, including items commissioned for the funeral. Animals were gathered for sacrifice. The burial site was prepared with careful attention to landscape and visibility. The procession to the burial site must have been spectacular. Hundreds of people might participate in dragging a longship overland. The physical effort required created communal investment in the burial. Everyone who helped haul that ship would remember their participation. The route itself might have significance. Passing important landmarks, crossing boundaries, climbing from sea level to the heights where the dead would rest. The ship's final journey over land inverted its natural element, marking the transformation from earthly to spiritual vessel. Placement of the body and goods followed specific patterns. The deceased typically rested in the stern, the command position. In the Oseberg burial, a tent-like structure was erected over the burial chamber, creating a house within the ship. Beds, chairs and chests recreated domestic space. Weapons were arranged as if for use, Swords at hand, shields along the rail, kitchen equipment occupied the bow. The organisation suggests not random accumulation but careful recreation of living spaces, translated to death's requirements. Animal sacrifice played a crucial role. Horses were most common, transportation for the afterlife journey. Dogs appeared frequently, perhaps as companions or guards. The Oseberg burial included 15 horses, 4 dogs and 2 oxen. The Gokstad burial contained 12 horses and 6 dogs. These weren't old animals killed for convenience, but healthy beasts in their prime, valuable property destroyed to serve the dead. Some showed signs of poleaxing, others of decapitation. The killing method might have had ritual significance now lost to us. Human sacrifice in ship burials remains controversial. Ibn Fadlan's account describes a slave girl voluntarily, though the voluntariness is questionable, dying with her master. Archaeological evidence is ambiguous. Some burials contain multiple individuals, but determining whether they died simultaneously or represent later additions proves difficult. The Oseberg burials, 2 women died at the same time, but their similar ages suggest companion burial rather than sacrifice. The question touches modern sensibilities, reminding us these were societies with different values regarding life, death, and obligation. The goods placed in ship burials reveal Viking material culture in extraordinary detail. Weapons dominate male burials: swords, spears, axes, shields, armour. But these aren't always warriors' weapons. Some swords show no use where, suggesting ceremonial rather than practical purpose. The Gokstad shields, painted yellow and black, were too thin for combat, funeral equipment rather than battle gear. The distinction suggests grave goods served symbolic as much as practical purposes. Household items fill ship burials, especially female ones. The Oseberg burial contained multiple looms, suggesting textile production's importance. Kitchen equipment included cauldrons, buckets, knives, and querns for grinding grain. Furniture ranged from simple stools to elaborately carved chairs. Chests contained clothing, now mostly decayed, but leaving traces of fine fabrics and embroidery. These items equipped the dead for domestic life in the afterworld, suggesting Vikings imagined death as continuation rather than transformation. Personal ornaments and jewellery marked status and identity. Brooches held clothing and displayed wealth. Arm rings and neck rings, often of gold or silver, proclaimed prosperity. Beads of glass, amber, and semi-precious stones created colourful displays. Some items showed extensive wear. Treasured possessions worn in life. Others appeared newly made for the funeral. The mix suggests both continuity and transformation, the dead taking familiar objects, but also receiving new equipment for their journey. Imported goods in ship burials demonstrate Viking trade networks. Byzantine silks, Frankish swords, Anglo-Saxon metalwork, Islamic coins. The inventory reads like an international trade catalogue. These items proclaim the deceased's worldly connections and sophisticated taste. A Buddha figurine in the Oseberg burial, probably from northern India, shows how far Viking networks reached. Such exotica enhance the burial's impressiveness while equipping the dead with powerful foreign magic. Ships themselves required modification for burial use. Masts were often removed or lowered. Vertical elements might pierce the burial mound or interfere with the chamber construction. The Oseberg ship shows careful preparation. Oar holes were sealed, the mast lowered, and anchor removed. These modifications transformed the vessel from active ship to ritual container. Yet care was taken to preserve the ship's integrity. It remained a vessel, just one prepared for a different kind of voyage. Not everyone meriting ship symbolism could afford an actual vessel. Stone ship settings provided alternatives, arrangements of standing stones outlining a ship's shape. These range from small boat outlines to massive constructions rival real ships in size. The stones at Jelling in Denmark, associated with the royal dynasty, created a symbolic fleet for the dead. Stone ships could be added to earlier graves, suggesting continued veneration. They might surround cremation deposits or stand empty as cenotaphs. The flexibility shows ship burial's symbolic importance transcended specific practices. Partial ship burials offered another alternative. Sometimes just part of a vessel was used, a section of hull, a prow, or even just rivets arranged in ship patterns. The Volga burials in Sweden show this variation, with some graves containing complete boats while others used fragments. The practice suggests the symbol mattered more than the complete object. Even a portion of a ship could carry the dead, just as a fragment of the true cross carried full sacred power for medieval Christians. The cosmological beliefs underlying ship burial come partly from later written sources, the Eddas and sagas recorded in Christian times but preserving older traditions. Ships feature prominently in Norse mythology. Naglfar, made from dead men's nails, will carry the forces of chaos at Ragnarok. Skidbladnir, Freyr's ship, could hold all the gods but be folded up like cloth. The gods travel by ship between worlds. This mythological prominence suggests ships weren't just practical tools but cosmic vehicles bridging realms. The afterlife destinations imagined for the dead varied by status and manner of death. Warriors who died in battle might go to Valhalla, Odin's Hall, or to Folkvanga, Freya's field. Those who died of sickness or old age went to Hel, the goddess who ruled the dead. But saga evidence suggests more varied beliefs. Some dead remained in their burial mounds, some travelled to a mysterious mountain called Helgafell, others joined ancestors in family groups. Ship burial's elaborateness suggests anxiety about ensuring the dead reached their proper destination. Water held special significance in Norse cosmology. Rivers and seas separated worlds, the living from the dead, Midgard from other realms. Ships were the natural vehicle for crossing these boundaries. But ship burial inverted this symbolism, placing watercraft in earth. This paradox might have held power, the ship poised forever at the moment of departure, eternally ready to sail when conditions allowed. The earth mound became a wave bearing the ship between worlds. Social hierarchy dominated Viking society, and ship burials proclaimed rank emphatically. Only the elite received ship burial. The archaeological record shows perhaps a few hundred examples across centuries and vast territories. The resources required placed ship burial beyond most families' reach. You needed not just a ship, but the social power to commandeer community labour. The resulting monument declared the deceased's family could afford this expenditure, possessed this authority, commanded this respect. Ship size correlated with status. The grandest burials used longships. The Oseberg ship measured 21.5 metres, Gokstad 23.8 metres. These were major vessels requiring large crews. Smaller burials used smaller boats, down to modest rowing boats for lesser elites. The hierarchy of vessels matched social hierarchy, ensuring even in death that rank was observed. A petty chieftain wouldn't be buried in a vessel grander than his king's, maintaining proper order even in the afterlife. The landscape placement of ship burials created lasting monuments. Mounds were positioned for visibility. On ridges, beside waterways, near important roads. They became landmarks naming the terrain. Sail past Olaf's How. Turn at the Queen's Mound. This visibility ensured continued remembrance. Each time someone passed the mound, they'd recall the buried individual, their family, their deeds. The monumentality created what archaeologists call genealogical landscapes, terrain inscribed with family histories and power relationships. Maintenance of burial mounds suggests continued veneration. Some mounds show evidence of repeated visits, offerings left at the base, structures built for gatherings, paths worn by visitors. The ship burial didn't end family obligations but transformed them. The dead required attention, seasonal offerings, protective rituals, inclusion in important decisions. Sagas describe families consulting ancestors buried in mounds, seeking their approval for marriages or ventures. The ship burial created a permanent anchor point connecting living and dead. The fear of Draga, the undead, influenced burial practices. Norse belief held that improperly buried dead might return as physical revenants, not ethereal ghosts, but corporeal beings of terrible strength. Ship burial's elaborateness might partly reflect desire to satisfy the dead so thoroughly they'd rest peacefully. The goods provided everything needed for comfortable afterlife existence. The ship offered means of departure if the dead wished to journey. Satisfied dead were safe dead. Some burial practices specifically prevented the dead from returning. bodies might be bound, ships anchored, mounds sealed with stones. The Oseberg ship was moored with a massive stone anchor, as if to prevent departure. Some bodies were decapitated, with heads placed at their feet. Iron rivets might be driven through feet to prevent walking. These practices suggest ambivalence, wanting the dead properly equipped for the afterlife while ensuring they stayed there. Christianity's arrival transformed burial practices. The Church condemned ship burial as pagan waste, insisting on simple burial in consecrated ground. Yet the transition wasn't immediate or complete. Some Christian Vikings received ship-shaped stone settings around their graves, maintaining the symbolism while abandoning the practice. Others were buried with ships but without grave goods, compromising between traditions. Runic inscriptions on late burial monuments sometimes invoke both Christ and Thor, hedging spiritual bets. The end of ship burial marked broader cultural changes. As Scandinavian kingdoms centralized, local chieftains lost the autonomy to command resources for elaborate burials. Church control over burial rites standardized practices. The international connections that brought wealth for grave goods shifted to different patterns. Most fundamentally, Christian cosmology offered different answers to death's mysteries. Salvation came through faith and sacraments, not ships and grave goods. Archaeological investigation of ship burials began in nationalism's age. 19th century Norwegians and Danes saw Viking heritage as defining national identity, making ship burial excavation patriotic acts. Early excavations often prioritized recovering spectacular objects over scientific recording. The Oseberg excavation of 1904, though careful by contemporary standards, would horrify modern archaeologists. Wooden artifacts were boiled in alum to preserve them, a treatment now known to cause long-term degradation. Modern techniques reveal details early excavators missed. Dendrochronology dates wooden objects precisely through tree ring patterns. Isotope analysis of bones indicates diet and geographic origin. DNA analysis can determine relationships between individuals in multiple burials. Soil chemistry reveals decomposed organics, textiles, foods, and human remains, invisible to the naked eye. Each technological advance adds layers to our understanding. Conservation challenges plague ship burial artifacts. The Oseberg wooden objects, treated with alum, now face catastrophic degradation as the alum breaks down. The ships themselves require constant climate control to prevent collapse. Iron objects rust, textiles fragment, and bone decalcifies. The spectacular finds that revolutionized Viking Age understanding now demand resources that strain museum budgets. The irony is poignant. Objects meant for eternity struggle to survive their resurrection. Ship burials continue yielding surprises. Ground-penetrating radar identifies buried ships without excavation. The technology recently located a ship burial at Gesta in Norway, the first major find in a century. Such discoveries remind us that known ship burials represent a fraction of what exists. Each farm field and construction project might conceal another Oseberg. The archaeological potential remains vast, limited more by resources and ethics than by lack of sites. The cultural impact of ship burial discoveries extends far beyond archaeology. The Oseberg and Gokstad ships became Norwegian national symbols, reproduced on everything from church doors to Olympics medals. Viking ship imagery permeates popular culture, though usually simplified to dragon-headed warships rather than the burial vessels that actually survive. Museums displaying ship burials attract millions of visitors seeking connection to Viking heritage. Modern Scandinavians wrestle with ship burials' meaning for contemporary identity. The spectacular artifacts inspire pride in ancestors' achievements. But the violence implicit in Viking society, the slavery that supported elite wealth, and the human sacrifice that might accompany burial complicate simple celebration. Ship burials embody this complexity. Beautiful artifacts created through social inequality, magnificent monuments built on others' labour, religious devotion expressed through practices we find abhorrent. The ethics of displaying human remains from ship burials sparks debate. Should the Oseberg women be exhibited, or do they deserve reburial? How do we balance scientific research with respect for the dead? Indigenous peoples worldwide have forced reconsideration of archaeological ethics, influencing how Scandinavian museums approach Viking Age remains. Some argue that displaying ship burial remains continues the monument's original purpose, proclaiming the deceased's importance. Others see voyeuristic exploitation of individuals who couldn't consent to their exhibition. Tourism around ship burial sites creates economic benefits but also challenges. The burial mounds at Brewer in Norway attract thousands of visitors whose feet erode the monuments they come to see. Replica ships allow tourists to experience Viking sailing, though the connection to burial vessels is tenuous. Local communities benefit economically, but struggle to balance access with preservation. The dead who sought eternal remembrance achieved it, though in forms they couldn't have imagined. Climate change threatens ship burial sites in unexpected ways. Rising sea levels endanger coastal mounds. Changing precipitation patterns affect soil chemistry, accelerating decay of buried organics. Warming temperatures allow new organisms to colonize burial environments, disrupting preservation conditions stable for centuries. The Vikings who worried about their afterlife journey couldn't have foreseen this threat. Their carefully constructed monuments vulnerable to atmospheric carbon from industrial society. What can ship burials teach modern society? First, they remind us that attitudes toward death reflect attitudes toward life. Vikings buried their elite in ships because ships embodied their society's core values: mobility, technological mastery, and hierarchical display. Our own burial practices, from green burials to digital memorials, similarly reflect contemporary values. The forms change, but the impulse to make death meaningful remains constant. Second, ship burials demonstrate how material culture carries meaning beyond function. A ship wasn't just transportation, but a symbol of cosmic order, social power, and technological achievement. The grave goods weren't simple possessions, but statements about identity, relationships, and beliefs. This symbolic density challenges modern tendencies to separate practical from meaningful, suggesting objects always carry cultural weight beyond their use. Third, the community effort ship burial required shows how death rituals create social bonds. Everyone who helped drag that ship, who contributed goods, who built the mound, became part of the story. The burial created shared memory and mutual obligation. Modern Western society, with professionalized death services and private grief, might learn from this communal approach. Death isolates, but death rituals can unite. Fourth, ship burial's combination of preservation and transformation offers metaphors for cultural continuity. The ship remained a ship, but became something more, a threshold between worlds. Similarly, cultures preserve essential elements while adapting to new circumstances. The Vikings who developed ship burial from older traditions and passed it on, transformed showed how tradition can be both stable and dynamic. Finally, ship burials remind us that monumentality doesn't guarantee immortality, at least not in expected forms. The chieftains buried with such expense probably imagined eternal veneration by descendants. Instead, their mounds were opened by archaeologists, their goods dispersed to museums, their bodies subjected to scientific analysis. They achieved immortality through scholarship rather than worship. The afterlife they found, as subjects of documentaries, inspirations for novels, attractions for tourists, differs vastly from what they expected. Yet perhaps this unexpected afterlife fits Viking pragmatism. They were adaptable people who travelled widely and adopted useful innovations. If told their burial ships would sail through museums rather than mythological seas, carrying knowledge rather than souls, they might have approved. The journey continues, just in directions no saga ever imagined. Ship burial stands as the Viking Age's most dramatic archaeological legacy because it crystallizes the era's essential characteristics: the technological achievement of the ships themselves, the artistry of the grave goods, the social organization burial required, the religious beliefs expressed, the cultural connections revealed, all combine in these buried vessels. They are libraries written in wood and metal, complete texts about a vanished world. As you finish your tea and reflect on Vikings sending their dead to sea in buried ships, consider what paradoxes define your own culture. What contradictions between ideal and practice characterize modern life? What objects would archaeologists 1,000 years hence find most revealing about our beliefs and values. The Vikings, who buried ships in earth rather than sailing them on water, created monuments to the human capacity for symbolic thinking, the ability to see in a beached vessel a voyage to eternity. The mounds still dot Scandinavian landscapes, grass-covered waves frozen in earth. Beneath some lie ships and treasures awaiting discovery. Beneath others, long excavated chambers hold only memory of vanished wood and bone. But all remain monuments to the Viking belief that death was not an ending, but a departure, requiring proper vessel and equipment for the journey. In burying their ships, Vikings buried their worldview, and in excavating them, we uncover not just artifacts, but entire cosmologies preserved in timber and soil. The tradition of ship burial lasted roughly 5 centuries, a brief moment in human history. Yet those buried vessels carry cargo more precious than gold or weapons. They bear witness to how one culture faced mortality's mystery with creativity, community, and hope. The ships never sailed their intended voyage to the afterlife. Instead, they sailed through time to reach us, bearing messages about death, memory, and meaning that resonate across 1,000 years. In the end, perhaps that's the true afterlife, not in some mysterious other world, but in the continued conversation between past and present, the dead speaking to the living through the objects they left behind.